She didn't look at him when she stepped off the train. That was the first thing Maren Dodd noticed about herself, that she couldn't do it. She had rehearsed the moment 100 times on the 30-hour ride from Cincinnati. She would step onto the platform, square her shoulders, find the man holding the sign with her name on it, and look him directly in the eye. Firm. Calm. Like a woman who had made a sensible decision and had no regrets about it. Instead, she stared at her shoes. The platform at Hector's Crossing, Montana, smelled like coal smoke and pine, and something underneath both of those things. Something cold and mineral that she didn't have a name for yet. The wind cut straight through her wool coat. It was April, and she had been told it would still feel like February this far north, and whoever told her that had not been exaggerating. Miss Dodd, it wasn't a question. She looked up. The man standing 10 feet away from her was not what she had expected, and she realized in that moment that she had been expecting something specific without ever admitting it to herself. She had expected someone older, someone weathered in the way that old fence posts are weathered, gray and a little soft at the edges, harmless. She had expected a man who needed a wife the way a man needs a housekeeper, practically, without complication. Boone Ritter was none of those things. He was tall, not dramatically so, but tall enough that she had to adjust her gaze upward. His jaw was dark with stubble that was probably 2 days old, and his eyes, even from 10 feet away, were the particular pale gray of river ice. He was holding his hat in both hands, turning it slowly at the brim, and he looked like a man who had been practicing standing still. "Yes," she said, "that's me." He nodded once. He didn't smile. He walked to where her 2 bags sat on the platform, picked them both up without asking, and started toward a dark green truck parked at the edge of the gravel lot. Maren followed him, because there was nothing else to do. She had answered the advertisement in October, when the cold had come early to Cincinnati, and the apartment she shared with her younger sister felt smaller than it ever had before. Rancher, 34, seeks capable woman for companionship and partnership. Must be comfortable with rural life. No pretense, she had read it 3 times. She had laughed at it once, and then she had written a letter. What followed were 4 months of correspondence. Boone Ritter wrote the way some men talk, carefully, and not very much. His letters were short. They told her facts. The ranch was 1/400 acres. He ran cattle. There was a house that needed work, but was solid. The nearest town was 11 miles east. He told her he had been married before. He told her his wife had died 4 years ago. He told her he wasn't looking for love exactly, but he was looking for something real. That last part had stayed with her. She had written back, "I'm not looking for love either. I'm looking for something that holds." He had written, "That's enough." Now she sat in the passenger seat of his truck and watched the landscape open up around them, and she thought that she had been a fool to think a letter could prepare her for any of this. The ranch appeared after 40 minutes of silence and gravel road. The house was white, or had been once, and sat back from a long dirt track behind a row of cottonwoods that were just beginning to bud. There were outbuildings behind it, a large barn, 2 smaller structures, a corral where 3 horses stood motionless against the fence like they were posing for a painting. Boone parked the truck. He got out. He carried her bags to the front door and set them on the porch, and then turned to her with the expression of a man who has reached the limit of what he knows how to do. "Kitchen's through there," he said. "Your room is up the stairs, first door on the left. I sleep at the end of the hall, bathrooms between us." He paused. "I'll leave you to settle." "Mr. Ritter," she said. He stopped. "I want you to know I'm not fragile," she said. "You don't have to treat me like I might break." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind those rivery's eyes, something she couldn't name yet. "I know you're not," he said, and he went to the barn. She stood on the porch alone and listened to the wind move through the cottonwoods and thought, "What have I done?" The first week was mostly silence. Not the hostile kind. The cautious kind. The silence of 2 people measuring the space between them, learning where the edges are. Maren cooked breakfast before dawn because she had always been an early riser, and because having something to do with her hands helped. Boone appeared in the kitchen at 5:30 each morning, drank 2 cups of black coffee, ate whatever she'd made without comment, and went out. He came back at noon for 20 minutes. He came back at dusk and ate dinner, and sometimes sat in the front room with a book, and sometimes didn't, and always said goodnight at 9 o'clock exactly. On the 4th day, she went out to the barn without telling him she was coming. He was repairing a section of fence rail, crouched down in the dirt with a mallet and a handful of nails. And he didn't hear her until she was standing right behind him. He startled badly, the kind of startle that isn't just surprise, that comes from somewhere deeper, and spun around with his hand out like he expected to need it. Then he saw it was her, and his hand dropped to his side. "Sorry," she said. "I should have called out." "No." He turned back to the fence. "I'm not. It's fine." She watched him work for a moment. His hands were very steady now, which told her that the startle had cost him something and he was working to get it back. "Can I help?" she asked. "Don't need help." "I know you don't need it. I'm asking if I can." He didn't answer, but he didn't say no again, and when she crouched down across from him and held the rail in place while he drove the nails, he didn't tell her to stop. They worked in silence for an hour. At the end of it, she had dirt on her coat and a splinter in her left thumb, and something that felt distantly like the beginning of something. He noticed the splinter when she was pulling her gloves off. He said, without looking at her face, "Come inside. I've got tweezers." It was the most words he'd said to her at one time since she'd arrived. "Okay," she said. The trouble started on a Thursday, 3 weeks after she arrived. She was in town, Hector's Crossing proper, which was barely a town at all, just a grain elevator and a hardware store and a diner called Patty's that served decent pie, picking up the supply order that Boone called in every 2 weeks. The man at the hardware counter, whose name was Gil, and who had a long gray ponytail and a general air of having seen too much, was loading her truck bed when he paused. "You're Boone Ritter's wife," he said. Not accusatory, just confirming. "His?" "Yes," she said. It was the first time anyone had called her that. Gil went back to loading. Then quieter. "You know he had trouble a while back, before his first wife passed." Maren waited. "Fella named Strick Aldane. Came through looking at land, decided he wanted Ritter's land specifically. When Boone wouldn't sell, things got unpleasant." Gil set the last bag in the truck and looked at her directly. "Heard Strick's back in the county. Bought a parcel up on the North Ridge. Thought you ought to know, is all. Thought someone ought to tell you." Maren drove back to the ranch and thought about that the whole way. She didn't tell Boone what Gil had said. Not right away. Because she was still figuring out how to tell Boone things. She watched him differently that evening. He was quieter than usual over dinner, and once or twice she caught him looking out the dark window over the sink with that particular kind of stillness that isn't peace but is its opposite. "Something's bothering you," she said. He looked at her. He seemed surprised that she'd said it out loud. "Strick Aldane is back," he said finally. "I found out today. He bought land bordering mine on the north side." "I know," she said. "Jill told me in town." Something shifted in his expression, not quite relief, but adjacent to it. "You didn't say anything. I was waiting to see if you'd bring it up yourself." She folded her napkin. "Who is he?" Boone was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. Strick Aldane had come to Hector's Crossing 6 years ago with money and a surveyor and a specific agenda. He was a land consolidator. That was the polite word for it. He bought up smaller ranches, piece by piece, combined them, sold them to developers, or held them for grazing rights. He had wanted Ritter land badly enough to make offers that became threats that became vandalism on the north fence line and 2 dead cattle and a fire set in the south pasture that Boone had caught before it spread. The county sheriff at the time had been useless. Aldane had been careful. Nothing stuck. Then Boone's wife, Catherine, had gotten sick, and Aldane had backed off during that time or seemed to, and then Catherine died, and Aldane disappeared from the county entirely for 4 years. "Until now," Maren said. "Until now." She looked at him across the dinner table. The lamplight made the angles of his face look harder than they were. She thought about the way he had startled in the barn that first week. She thought about the set of his shoulders every time he came back from checking the north fence. "He's not going to get this land," she said. Boone looked at her for a long time. "You can't know that." "No," she agreed. "But I'm saying it anyway." The first incident happened 2 weeks later. Maren found it in the morning, before Boone was back from the south pasture. The north fence cut in 3 places, clean cuts, not accident, not animal. Fence posts pulled and laid flat. A section of the stock trail blocked with a fallen tree that hadn't fallen naturally. She photographed everything with the camera she'd brought from Cincinnati, the old 35mm she'd had since college, because her father had always told her, "Document everything, always, because memory is not evidence." She was on her 3rd photograph when she heard the truck. It wasn't Boone's truck. It was a black pickup, newer, and it pulled up slowly on the dirt track along the fence line and stopped 30 feet away. The man who got out was maybe 50, thick through the chest, with the kind of deliberate ease that men carry when they want you to know they're not hurrying for anyone. "Morning," he said. She lowered the camera. She did not step back. "This is private land," she said. "I know it." He smiled. "Just checking on the fence situation. Seems like you've got some damage up here." "We do," she said. "I'm documenting it." He looked at the camera. Something moved in his face, a flicker of recalculation. "You must be the new wife." "I am Strick Aldane," he said, like he was presenting her with a gift. "I own the property just north. We're neighbors." "I know who you are," she said. He studied her for a moment. The smile stayed on his face but moved away from his eyes. "Well, sorry about the fence. Hope it works out for you both." He got back in his truck. He pulled away slowly. Maren stood and watched him go and felt something in her chest that took her a moment to identify. Not quite fear, more like recognition, the feeling of finally seeing clearly what you had only guessed at before. She finished photographing the fence. Then she drove into town and made copies of every photo at the pharmacy. She kept one set. She mailed one set to her sister in Cincinnati with a note, "Hold on to these." She filed one set with the county clerk's office, which required 45 minutes of explanation, and one conversation with a deputy named Flores, who was young and took good notes. She got home before Boone. When he came in at noon, she told him everything, in order, without leaving anything out. She put the photographs on the kitchen table. He stood and looked at them for a long time without speaking. "You filed with the county," he said. "Yes. Flores is a good deputy. Better than the last sheriff." He looked up at her. "You did all of this morning. You were in the south pasture. Someone had to." He sat down at the table. He pressed both hands flat on the photographs and looked at them, and she could see something working in him, something being rearranged at a level that didn't show on his face. "The last time," he said very quietly, "Catherine wanted to call the sheriff and I told her not to. I thought I could handle it myself." "I thought." He stopped. "She got sick 2 months later. And I always thought if I'd just let her help, if I'd let her in, maybe I would have been paying more attention to her instead of trying to carry it alone." Maren sat down across from him. She didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say to that. After a moment he said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just let me help." Things moved faster after that. Deputy Flores paid Aldane an official visit, which accomplished something purely psychological. Aldane now knew that Ritter had documentation and county eyes on him. The fence sabotage stopped for 3 weeks. They began to hope, carefully, that the visibility was enough to deter him. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was from a law firm in Billings, formally notifying Boone Ritter that Strick Aldane was contesting the eastern boundary of the Ritter property, claiming a survey discrepancy that placed 12 acres of Ritter land inside Aldane's recently purchased parcel. The letter was dense and technical, and clearly designed to be overwhelming. Maren read it twice. Then she called her cousin Deb, who was a paralegal in Columbus, and who owed her a significant favor from 2019. Deb listened to the whole thing and said, "Okay, first thing is, don't panic. Second thing is, you need a property attorney, not a general practice guy, and you need him to pull the original survey from the county records before Aldane's people do anything to complicate that process. Is that something they could do? Not legally. But the window between legally and illegally is where these guys like to operate." Maren called 3 attorneys in Billings before she found one who could see them within a week. A woman named Patricia Ennis, who had been doing property law for 22 years, and who said, on the phone, in a tone that Maren found immediately reassuring, "I've seen this exact play before. Come in Thursday." She told Boone about the attorney over dinner. He looked at her across the table with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Something unguarded, something that looked a little like wonder. "How did you find her that fast?" he asked. "I called everyone in the book until I got to someone competent." She passed him the bread. "That's all it was. I wouldn't have known where to start. That's why there are 2 of us," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm starting to think this arrangement might be more in my favor than I realized." It was the closest thing to a joke she had ever heard him make. She felt something warm move through her chest that she noted and set aside for later examination. Patricia Ennis was everything her phone manner had promised. She pulled the original 1947 survey within 24 hours of their visit and found, immediately, that Aldane's claimed boundary discrepancy was based on a selectively cited partial survey from 1989 that had never been formally registered and held no legal standing. She filed a counter-response within the week. "This doesn't end it," she told them, sitting behind her desk in Billings with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. "Aldane will find another angle. Men like this don't stop because you block one move. They stop because it stops being worth it." "How do we make it not worth it?" Boone asked. "You make it expensive and public," Ennis said. "Every legal challenge he makes, you counter aggressively and you make sure the county knows about it. You talk to your neighbors, you get them invested in the outcome, because he's probably going to go after them too. And you document everything." She looked at Maren when she said the last part. Maren felt that she had passed some kind of test. On the drive home, Boone didn't speak for the first 40 minutes. Then, somewhere north of the county line, he said, "I owe you an apology." Maren looked at him. "For what?" "I asked you here to be a practical arrangement. A partner in the household sense. And you've been more than that." "I've been pretending not to notice." The road stretched ahead of them, empty and pale under the afternoon sky. The mountains to the west were still carrying snow on their upper ridges. "Why have you been pretending?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Then, because the last time I let myself rely on someone, I lost her. And I had some idea that if I kept you at a certain distance, if I was careful enough about it, I could have the practical part without the..." He stopped. "Without the risk," she said. "Yes." She looked out at the mountains. "That's not how it works," she said. "You know that." "I'm starting to," he said. The second incident happened on a night in May when the wind was bad. Maren woke at 2 in the morning to a smell she didn't recognize immediately, and then did smoke. She was out of bed and in the hallway before she was fully conscious, and she was pounding on Boone's door with both fists before she even saw the orange light in the window at the end of the hall. He came out in 3 seconds, fully alert. The kind of alertness that doesn't need warming up, that's always there just under the surface in men who have learned to expect the worst. He looked at the window. He looked at her face. "Barn," he said. "I'll call 911, she said. "Get the horses out first if you can get in safely." "I know," she said. "Go." She called 911 from the kitchen while running for her boots. She gave the address, the situation, and was out the door in under 2 minutes. The barn was not fully involved yet. The fire had started in the south corner, in a pile of old feed sacks that had no business being that dry this time of year, and Boone was already inside with a lead rope, moving with the economy of motion that comes from not having time for fear. Maren went in behind him. The horses were not manageable. They were panicked and striking out, and the smoke was thickening fast. She took the lead rope from the hook near the door, the one she'd seen Boone use 100 times in the past month, and she went to the bay mare, who was frightened, and she put one hand on the mare's neck and talked to her in a low, steady voice that she was not sure she believed, but the horse didn't need to know that. The mare let her put the rope on. She got 2 horses out. Boone got the other one. They stood in the yard, in the acrid dark, and watched the volunteer fire department arrive 11 minutes after her call, which was fast for this part of the county, and they watched the fire come under control over the next 40 minutes, and the barn was saved. Damaged in the south corner, the roof compromised in a section, but standing. Boone stood next to her in the yard for a long time after the fire trucks left. His face was streaked with smoke. There was a burn on his left forearm that he hadn't mentioned and wouldn't mention until she noticed it. "You went in," he said. "So did you?" "You didn't have to." She turned and looked at him directly. They were close enough that she could see the way the smoke damage made him look older, close enough that she could see the thing in his face that he hadn't let her see before, that he wasn't managing anymore. "Boone," she said, "when are you going to stop being surprised that I'm here?" He looked at her for a long time. The horses were quiet behind them. The burned smell was in everything. "I don't know," he said, honestly. "Well," she said, "I'll keep showing up until you get used to it." He reached out and put one hand against the side of her face, just briefly, just for a moment. The way you touch something you're not sure is real yet. Deputy Flores arrested Strick Aldane 9 days later. The evidence had been building for weeks. Flores had been thorough and patient in the way that good law enforcement is when it has something to work with. The arson investigators' report from the barn fire cited deliberate ignition. A witness came forward, a man named Teddy, who worked part-time at the grain elevator and had seen Aldane's truck on the Ritter Road at midnight. The county attorney got involved. Patricia Ennis provided the legal harassment documentation. It didn't happen in a dramatic way. There were no confrontations, no final standoffs. Aldane was taken into custody on a Wednesday afternoon and driven to Billings, and the charges included arson, criminal mischief, and harassment. His attorneys were expensive and the case would take time. But the county attorney was confident. Maren found out when Flores called her cell phone because Boone was in the back pasture, and she was the one who answered. She walked out to find him. The day was warm, genuinely warm. The first day that had felt like spring might actually be a promise kept rather than a postponement. The cottonwoods along the drive were fully leafed out now, green and rustling, and the horses were moving in the pasture in that loose, unhurried way they have when nothing is wrong. She found him at the east fence, checking wire. He heard her coming and turned, and she could see from the way he looked at her that he already knew something had shifted, that he could all read her face now after way you learn to foread weather when you live close enough to it to matter. Aldane, he said. Arrested. Wednesday afternoon. She stopped next to him. Flores called. He said it's solid. Boone turned back to the fence. He stood very still for a moment. She watched the tension go out of his shoulders, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, the way ice goes out of a river in March, piece by piece until the water runs clear. He turned back to her, and for the first time since she had stepped onto that platform at Hector's Crossing with her eyes on her shoes, he looked entirely unguarded. No managing, no measuring, no careful distance. I don't know how to do this, he said. I know you don't, she said. I keep waiting for the part where you leave. I know that too. She stepped closer to him. The east fence ran away behind her into the long afternoon light. The mountains were blue and sharp on the horizon, the snow still on their high ridges, permanent and unhurried. I'm not leaving, she said. He nodded. He looked at her like he was deciding whether to believe something that he already knew was true, that he was just catching up to. The roof on the south end of the barn needs to be rebuilt, he said. Yes, I could use some help measuring. I imagine you could. You any good with measurements? I'm better than you might think, she said. He reached out then and took her hand. Not tentatively. With the same steadiness she'd watched him use on fences and horses and everything that needed holding, the particular grip of a man who does not let go of things easily, and when he takes hold means it. They walked back toward the house together through the warm April afternoon, and the cottonwoods rustled overhead, and the horses moved in the pasture, and somewhere a meadowlark was calling from the top of a fence post, insistent and clear, the way they always are out here when the season finally turns. The work never ends on a ranch. She understood that now. She was starting to think that was exactly the point.